So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for the webinar, Effective Social Media Use for Grad Students. This is a panel that is provided to help students with insight into how social media platforms can be best utilized in their grad studies and their post-grad career options. The Canadian Sociological Association Students' Concerns Subcommittee wishes to situate its presence as the uninvited guest on the traditional territories of the First Nations, Métis, Inuit people across so-called Canada. This acknowledgement recognizes the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous nations and their territories that the CSA and its constituents work and live on. As a committee and organization, we strive to understand our role within Canada's ongoing settler colonial project that subjects Indigenous peoples to dispossession and genocide. We recognize our participation and complacency in colonial modalities and knowledge systems and are committed to decolonial praxis that centers and affirms the contributions of Indigenous elders and scholars to the field of sociology. Before we get started, I should let everyone know that the audience members are muted to limit background noise. And speaking of background noise, I'm sorry if you can hear the leaf blower that's going on outside. If you have questions during the panel, we encourage you to submit those through the Q&A function, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. Your questions will be visible to all attendees and panelists and audience members. You can also upvote questions to prioritize them. The panelists will address questions during the open Q&A session following the discussions. This webinar is organized and hosted by the CSA and the Student Concerns Subcommittee. If you would like to learn more about our members and what we do, or see any of our previous webinars recordings, please follow the link here and visit our page to learn more. So to get into our panel, I'm your host for today. My name is Nicole Millette. I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow working at the Gateway Cities Project with Dr. Karen Robson, and I received a PhD in sociology from the University of British Columbia in 2020. Today, we are very fortunate to be joined by three wonderful panelists who are willing to share their experiences using social media in their professional lives. And our first panelist is Kayan Christie. Kayan Christie is a doctoral student in the Department of Sociology at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. Her research interests exist in the nexus between race, gender, class, and health. Broadly speaking, she is interested in the structural determinants of health and the interplay between social and health inequalities. She uses intersectional, Black, Caribbean, transnational feminist approaches to better understand how structural inequality shapes the health outcomes and health experiences of Black people across the diaspora. In addition to Kayan, we are very happy to have Dr. Alan Martino. Dr. Martino is a faculty member in the Community Rehabilitation and Disability Studies program in the Department of Community Health Sciences at the University of Calgary. His main research interests are in critical disability studies, gender and sexualities, feminist and critical disability studies theories. His work has been published in journals including Disability Studies Quarterly, Canadian Disability Studies Journal, and Cultural Health and Sexuality, as well as edited volumes focused on disability and sexuality studies. He is the former co-lead of the Sociology of Disability Research Cluster at the Canadian Sociological Association, as well as the co-lead for the Emerging Disability and Intimate Citizenship Research and Advocacy Hub. Along with Dr. Martino, we also have Dr. Carrie Wu. Dr. Carrie Wu is Assistant Professor of Sociology at York University. His research focuses on political culture, immigration, and political sociology of health. He often shares his research with the public via national and international TV, radio, and newspaper forums, including NPR, CBC, CTV, The Washington Post, Toronto Star, Maclean's, and The Economist. So thank you all so much for taking part in the panel today. I'm so excited to get to chat with you all about how we can use social media to best help students and maybe even young career professionals to better support their professional development. So thank you all for being here. This is great. I'm gonna put out some general questions. I'll go around to each of you, but if you'd like to interject at any point, just use the raised hand signal and I'll get to you. So my first question is, what social media platforms do you most frequently use professionally? And I'll start with Kayon.
Yeah, I use Twitter professionally, and that's the only social media platform right now that I'm using professionally. Yeah.
Dr. Martino, what about you?
I'm very connected, so I use quite a few, but the main ones is Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And I would say that each one of them is for different reasons. And I can definitely expand on that. Yeah.
Awesome. So we'll ask Kerry Wu what he uses, and then we'll get you to expand on why you choose these ones. So Dr. Wu, what platform do you use?
I two platforms. One is Twitter. I'm also using Twitter quite a lot, and another one is ResearchGate. I'm not sure if ResearchGate can be considered as kind of like a media platform.
I think it can be. So then we're going to go back around in the opposite direction. So Dr. Wu, why do you use those platforms?
For me, Twitter and the ResearchGate, like Twitter, for me is like really a lot of news going on, and then the job post, and then like so also research update, and not just people, right? So organizations, ASA, CSA, all those organizations have their own Twitter account, and so that's I follow those. Just keep update all this new research news, students news, and all the opportunities, right? Even like when I was on job market a few years ago, right? A lot of job were posted on Twitter. So that's very interesting. Sometimes like you look at the university affairs for Canadian job, you look at ASA job bank for American job and some international jobs, like oftentimes you could miss, right? So, but when you follow on Twitter, sometimes like people share, like you can like or you even like you remind yourself, jobs like who are applying. Sometimes like people will share their tips, like how to apply jobs, how to like write a reply letter for article if you get an R and R, how you better teach, how you like even here like that we post those how to use social media like professionally, right? So all those news, research news, teaching news, opportunities, and also like a lot of organizations that they have their official accounts, right? Journals, they have their own journal. And then for ResearchGate, it's really is like for ResearchGate is similar to like Google Scholar, right? So for ResearchGate is that we can upload our papers, right? And then we can follow researchers, we can share our publications, and then people can look at your profile and download papers from your ResearchGate platform, right? So when you have your own individual account, like you can upload your recent research, right? So like create a website for like a personal website, but more specifically for the publications, for the research project you're doing.
Those are some really good points, using Twitter not only to follow people, but to follow different institutions. And it sort of fills the gap, especially if you're thinking about being on the job market, of different opportunities that might be available that if you might forget to check the ASA website or the CSA website, that they're right there for you. Dr. Martino, why do you use the platforms you use?
Yeah, I think it depends on what I want to share and with whom I want to share. So for example, LinkedIn is the most professional version of me that you're going to find, solely focused on my work and publications and that kind of aspect of my work. But when you go to Twitter, it's almost like this middle ground where I like to both engage as a scholar, but also as a human being. So people might see a little bit of insights into my personal life, not too much, but also a mix of a lot of what Dr. Uz has talked about, which is like a mix of talking about publications, but also getting information about what other people are doing professionally. And then comes Facebook, where it's much more contained group of who gets to follow me there. And then it's a lot more personal, I would say, right? Where I would talk about research in a different way, some of the challenges that I'm experiencing. So I guess it depends on what I want to share and with whom.
I think that's a really good point about the types of platforms you use really influence the types of information that you're going to be sharing with others. And I like that you were saying that it's not just about sharing professional aspects, but it's also allowing people professionally and maybe potential employers an opportunity to see who you are in a bit more context. That's really informative. Kayon. Oh, I think you muted.
Okay.
There you go.
Okay. I don't know what's going on. Can you hear me okay now?
Yep, you're back.
Okay, my computer's doing something. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, great. I was saying, Dr. Martino, when you had said that different social media applications kind of see different versions of yourself, it reminded me of that meme of like Instagram, Twitter, and there's like different, like one is, yeah. But so the social media app that I use is Twitter, and I use it because I have a really complicated relationship with social media. I am like a big fan of Dr. Cal Newport, and I follow him a lot, and I haven't read his book on digital minimalism yet, but I have listened to a lot of his podcasts about it. And I'm like an aspiring digital minimalist. So like digital minimalism is being this like approach to engaging with the digital technology in a way where you're selecting social media applications that you feel are adding the most value to your life. And so I was like really on Instagram and on Facebook and on Snapchat a lot. And then I decided that, okay, I need to pull back on that and just use like one professionally. And so I decided to use Twitter because I found that a lot of scholars around my age, a lot of like junior and senior scholars are on Twitter. As a junior scholar, as a graduate student, I found that it was like an appropriate platform to connect with people, to learn about opportunities, as Dr. Wu had said. So I found that that was probably the most useful social media app for me if I wanted to select just one to kind of situate myself as a sociologist in the field.
Excellent. Those are really good tips for maybe thinking about what we should prioritize in terms of the social media outlets we use and how we can think about them more meaningfully. So what are some of the benefits that you've experienced using social media to support your professional life? So I will start with Cam.
Yeah, several. So I think the first one would be like having an increased network and an increase like a community that I wouldn't have access to without social media. So I'm thinking back to my master's program where I was like one of two Black people in my department. And so Twitter was really, really helpful for me in finding like a community of Black sociologists, Black scholars that I could connect with. That meant a lot for me that I was able to connect with offline and develop really great relationships with. I was connected to the Association of Black Sociologists through Twitter, which has been like really important for me. I'm now on like the grad student committee and like I'm involved in that organization. So building community and some also like professional benefits there. As Dr. Wu had mentioned, Twitter is also like an amazing space to have access to different articles, to have access to different opportunities. Also like threads I find to be very informative. So people write really great threads about so many different topics, some like professional tips, some like threads about like a substantive area that I'm interested in, some threads about like a methodological issue that I'm interested in. And I think it's really great for me as like as a scholar to kind of keep up to date with that and follow that. And then also I think reimagining myself as like a professional and like what professionalism means, I found that Twitter has benefited me in that regard. So when I had first came on Twitter in my undergrad, I was in like medical education Twitter, and med ed Twitter is like super polished, like super like if you think of what professional like ideals around professionalism, that is what med Twitter embodies. When I started to go on sociology Twitter, though, I found that people were a lot more human, as Dr. Martino was referring to, a lot more human. They didn't just focus on like super professional or academic aspects of themselves. They focused on the human and like real aspects of themselves as well. And that I think was really inspirational for me and like redefining what professionalism meant and the type of scholar that I wanted to be. And so that has been really helpful for me in like figuring out who I am as a scholar and who I want to be as a scholar.
I think those are some really great points, that social media can be used to build community. And I think that that's one of the main aims for it. But I think that there's a way to find yourself and develop yourself within it. And I think that that's really important. Thanks. Dr. Martino, what about you?
Yeah, I agree with all those points. Definitely around finding and nourishing communities, especially as, you know, scholars of color or first generation, disabled scholars. Like, it's amazing that you're able to build those connections, right? And community, and ask questions, and vent sometimes frustrations as well, and work together. And it's even amazing to see some of those relationships becoming real life relationships, like offline. Like, I actually met some of the folks that I met on Twitter first, and we're trying to identify each other in person. So that's really amazing. Of course, I've definitely used this tools to learn about opportunities for funding, call for papers, conferences, and jobs and events. But I think the best part is also that piece again of humanizing, both humanizing myself as a person with bones and needs and human needs and family life and all these other things, but also seeing amazing scholars that I really admired being vulnerable and sharing other aspects of their life that is not just about work, right? I also found that it was a great exercise for me to kind of develop my persona. Who am I as a sociologist, right? So just by noting, for example, what my research interests are in my profile, and trying to think about what do I want to highlight here? What matters to me? I think those are important decisions that we make about, how people are going to see us, whether people want to follow you or not. I think most importantly too, it allowed me to connect with community partners. So one of the things, in addition to following colleagues who are in academia, I also love following community partners, community organizations, see what they're doing, what kinds of issues they're highlighting or seeing as most relevant and urgent. That gives me a great sense of the temperature as well in the community, some of the needs, but also allowed me to actually create new partnerships, right? To do research projects together, community-based work. So I really appreciated that. The last thing I'll say that it really helps me mobilize the work I do, right? You certainly have an audience that is not just academics. So sometimes when I have a new publication coming out, and I'll have an example later on, like I really put an effort into creating a post that is using accessible language, using emojis, and really trying to reach more people, right? To put the work out there.
That's a really good point. And I think that is something that I know myself and a lot of other sociology scholars maybe struggle with sometimes, is that when we publish our work and it just goes into a journal, it can feel like a bit of an echo chamber. But by using social media, we can maybe reach out to community partners or community groups or individuals that might be able to use this research directly. So we're reaching out maybe beyond some of the more formal means that we had available to us. Dr. Wu, what about you?
Kaya and Alan mentioned many aspects of the benefits from using social media. I just want to add one little thing, right? So having for example, Twitter account, right? So sometimes when you submit articles for journals, the journal will ask you to provide a Twitter account, right? So the reason is that if the paper got accepted, right, the journal will, for example, help you to add you, or trying to find you, and then trying to share the research, right? So they want to promote your research, right? So they want to add, for example, Alan, and then add, if you don't have an account, then they can't find you, right? So that's not just journal, all others, for example, you are in the news, or people read your research and then they want to reach out, right? A lot of people want to reach out through Twitter. And so then thinking not just you from your perspective, but thinking from others' perspective, from journal, from ASA, CSA. For example, CSA want to, first you got an award this year, next year, then CSA want to share the news with the community, right? So then one way is that CSA can add you on Twitter and they share the news. So just one little thing is that thinking about others, journals, organizations, they want to help you to promote your research, or even share the news and all that. So it's important in that way.
Thanks. Everyone, you provided really great benefits. So talking about especially relevant to students across Canada and who might be of different racialized backgrounds or different minority groups in these settings, that these platforms help you build community and connections with others who might be experiencing things that you might not be able to see reflected in your immediate department. And we've talked about this in other webinars. It's also really important for building up professional development and connections with the community and for helping you get your research out to a wider population. This is all fantastic. Before we started this webinar, I asked you if you could all send me an example of some of your favorite or most useful posts, and I'm going to share those with the screen now, if that's okay. And I'm going to go through each of them with you and ask you why these were so meaningful or important to you as examples, hopefully to help everybody else who is participating in this session to see the types of social media work that we can do. So bear with me. Technology, here we go. Okay, so the first person's post that we're going to look at is Carrie Lewis. So Carrie, you sent along this post, and I wanted to know why you thought that this one is particularly stands out for you and why it's so useful.
Yeah, so for me, I think I benefit a lot from using social media. It's like not just following the news, but also networking, right? So Kayan and Ellen mentioned about this too, like networking, right? So especially for me, for example, I got a new job here in the city of Toronto. I moved from Vancouver. Here, it's like, it's new, right? So like when I'm here, I need to like find people to work with or like collaborate and all that. Right? Social media provide a way. A lot of people send me message from Twitter, from ResearchGate. For example, this is just one example that, for example, during the pandemic, Professor Scott Sheeman, like he's at U of T, and then he has been collecting all this a lot of interesting panel data, right? So because we follow each other, we never met each other before, right? But we follow each other through ResearchGate, right? So I know what he's doing, like in terms of recent research. He probably read my ResearchGate too, like so now has some idea about what I'm doing. So then he reached out. Right, he reached out and then say, okay, I have those data, you wanna try to develop something project to work together, right? So then we meet and then we for coffee and we talk, and then from there, like from the social media, we start from social media and then we meet, and now we are collaborating, and then we writing article together, and then we submit articles together. So that's just one example that, especially when you move to different places, new places, and then maybe social media will provide a nice way to network, to get connected with others.
This is an awesome example. Not only is it a great example for showing how to build networks when you come to a new place and maybe don't have networks to draw on, but also how social media can be used to boost your research and boost the connections that you have and help you on this road for publication. So thank you so much for sharing that, Carrie. This is that's a great link. Thank you. Next, I would like to draw on some examples from Dr. Martino. So why did you send these along and why are these important for you?
Yeah, so I think that they achieve different things, right? So the posting on the right, it's one that it was a new publication I just had released, and I really wanted to make sure that more people knew about it. I have lots of organizations, community partners that follow my profile. So when I was drafting it, I was trying to use clear language. Like, people with disabilities face a series of barriers that limit their access to sexual spaces. And I use hashtags in there to get people's attention. I use the icon of like, here's an alert, new things. And I try to be as concise as possible, but it's still like, here's the publication and why it's relevant. And the post on the left, what I like about Twitter as a tool is that it's not just a one way. So it's not like just me throwing my research projects and researching and updates to people, but it's really a dialogue. So in that post, it was I was thinking about writing a piece for Inside Higher Education. And I was like, I really want to know what people's experience is like. So I threw this question and a whole bunch of people responded with their experiences. And I was able to write an amazing piece based on that. So to me, that illustrates how this is a dialogue. So sometimes I've seen social media users who almost treat it as more like just throwing things out there, right? This assumption that I'm just delivering information. But I think we can really use this in a more engaging manner, right? Getting feedback.
That's a really good point. And to think about using social media to try and get feedback on the work that we're doing or proposed work that we want to be working on and start collecting that network that can give us that. So that's excellent. Thank you. And Kayan, this post that you provided, why is this post important and what do you think it brings?
Yeah, well, I provided this post because this was like my one and only post that went viral. And I was like, oh, this is like an interesting experience with like having something go viral. But I also think that it was an interesting process of even like developing this post. So I'm a very serial retweeter and like liker. And so that means I retweet and like stuff a lot on Twitter, and I don't necessarily write my own thoughts. And I think that's me struggling with like what I should tweet, trying to unlearn some of the ideas around professionalism, and like step into my authentic voice. And then so over the summer and like last year, I've been in different spaces where I've been talking about like reframing imposter syndrome. It's not imposter syndrome, like it's white supremacy, like it's not you, it's the system. So I'm like, you know what, let me tweet something because I feel like I need to tweet more. And then so I was just like at home and I'm like, let me just tweet this because I've said it in so many different spaces. And then so I tweeted it. And the response was so like amazing, like overwhelming a little bit because I haven't had a tweet go viral before. But how this tweet, the response that I got, this tweet helped a lot of people in reframing how they understood imposter syndrome as well. And so I found that, I mean, this was like helpful for others. And I think this is like a really good example of like how you can see, like find these kind of like tidbits of like helpful information that help you on Twitter. So that's kind of why I provided this one.
I'm really glad that you shared this post because we're going to be talking about the content of this a little bit later in the discussion questions. And yeah, I think that you also speak to a really important point of a lot of the times we use Twitter and social media to repost and relink other people's things. And it can be really daunting as a student to share your own feelings and even your own research sometime. And I think that I appreciate that you talking about that, to share that vulnerability, that this is something that we all probably struggle with. And it's not easy sometimes putting yourself out there. So thanks, Kayan. Thanks for sharing this one. Okay, so now I'm going to do some changes back to the, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen. We're gonna go back to the questions. So what are some of the best tactics you've seen some others on social media use to further their career? So we're gonna talk about the bright and shiny things now, and then we're going to get to some of the more stickler things about using, or tricky things about using social media. So what are some of the best tactics that you've seen others use, or even that you've used? So what are some things that we can take home that we can use? Oh, sorry, I'll start with Kayan.
Yeah, so I'll say one that I found to be helpful, that I found one of my colleagues do this, several of my colleagues do this, and I'm starting to do this as well, but kind of allowing people to know what you do. So like what your research interests are, the type of things that you're studying. And you do that by tweeting stuff. You do that by talking about your research. You do that by retweeting things that are similar to you. You do that by talking about the opportunities that you're on. So if I'm on like a panel that's talking about this, or if I'm on a panel that's talking about like race and health, or if I'm doing something that are related to my research interest, it's important to post it on Twitter because people then associate you with that topic. And so I found that people will like send me articles that I maybe haven't looked at before that are relevant to my research interest, or people will send me like fellowship opportunities because they're like, oh, you're doing this, like this is related to what you're doing, or a conference opportunity, or a call for like a paper or something like that. And so I think that when people associate you with a topic, or you with like a certain a field, like it's helpful in like helping you in that you're getting more information about that, and then also helping you in that it also expands the opportunities that are available to you. So yeah.
That's a really great point. And I think that that's a really nice entryway that students can think about developing their persona online or through Twitter, is by retweeting and maybe liking other things that fall in line with your own values or your own research strategies. People will start to notice that, and they'll start to understand who you are without you maybe having to take that daunting step of posting your own feelings and your own words right out the gate. So that's a really great strategy. Thank you, Kayan. Dr. Martino, what about you?
Yeah, some of the things that I've done is trying to create attractive posts, tagging the right people, using the right hashtags, inserting myself in particular conversations that are happening. I think that helps. One of the exercises I've done with a couple of students here at U of C is also taking the time to map out who do you want to follow, right? Like who are the main people in your field? Who do you want to hear from, kind of connect with, right? So you can kind of start brainstorming should we follow here? The other thing that I've done and really appreciated was before conferences. It doesn't hurt to send people a message saying, oh my God, I really like your work. Would you mind giving me like 20 minutes of your time, like to chat over coffee? And I've never heard a no before. So I think people are usually people who are on Twitter, especially, they really want to connect. So if you ever need advice or something, like I wouldn't be afraid of reaching out. And the last thing I'll say, definitely be very thoughtful about the posts that you share, right? No matter how much we say that we're not condoning, recommending things we're posting, they're still connected to us, like no matter what. Mm-hmm. So every time before I post anything, I always read them carefully and, thoughtfully, because it does represent who you are, right? When it's no matter what. So just be very thoughtful about what you're sharing.
That's a really good point. So as much as we like to think that these are the words of someone else that we're sharing, they do reflect us if we do share it on our page. So it's something to consider when you're doing that. I really also like your point about reaching out to people through Twitter. I think that is something that I know I didn't utilize enough in my CSA and ASA meetings as a grad student, not reaching out enough and saying, hey, do you want to grab coffee? I'd maybe do it once or twice. But this is a really great way to get to know somebody and get to know maybe potential people that supervisors or colleagues that you might work with later, just by doing that simple reach out on Twitter. And I think that's a fantastic point to make. Dr. Wu, what about you? What do you think is some of the best tactics that you've used or maybe seen somebody else use?
One thing I will talk about is like we use social media, we can turn local things into global scale, right? So one example is like, for example, if you, like I saw like PhD students too, right? They within the department, they try to host some workshop methods training for others. So if you're a senior PhD student, you hold certain event for junior, right? But social media provide a way that is, you're not just, especially like the Zoom meeting, provide a way that you're hosting for your department within your department, but also hosting this event for at a global scale, right? People from UK, from Australia, from New Zealand, from Hong Kong can join too, right? So that's something that, like, for example, like last year, this one PhD student, she's doing a workshop on methods, and then I joined and I saw people from everywhere, like 300 people from everywhere. So that, and the only reason that become global is like she promote this event that she's going to host through Twitter, social media, right? So people from everywhere can join and then become a global thing, right? So especially for junior scholar, for young PhD students, we are doing things and then we want to know like we have been doing these things, right? So it will be help you, like people will know you, and then not just in terms of your research, but for example, community service and all that. Very important in terms of job market, in terms of like career progress.
Mm-hmm. That's a really good point that we often tend to think about our reach as Canadian scholars just being within the bounds of Canada, but we often don't think about it going into the States or internationally, that these webinars or that things that you post can actually open up doors a lot further than you're maybe expecting. Kayon, you have your hand up. Did you have a point you wanted to add?
Yeah, I had a point I wanted to add, and then also building on what you had just said, like it's so true that you never know who you're going to connect with on Twitter. I remember a med student she's in Texas. She slid into my DMs, like she wanted to have a conversation because she's interested in OB stuff and racial disparities in health. And then we had a Zoom conversation talking about that. Nothing ended up coming of that, but we are connected now. I have her number, we're in communication, but it's just like, I would have never expected to talk. I would have never talked to her had it not been on Twitter. And the second thing that I wanted to add about some tactics that you can use. So I was reflecting on my experience as like a student, and another student, a social student, was tweeting about like, oh, it's so hard for me to write. Like I need a writing group. He just tweeted that. And I'm like, oh my God, me too. And then we DM'd each other, and then we started doing writing groups, like weekly writing groups. So you never know how like a very simple tweet can impact somebody or can connect you to somebody. And then also it's also a good way to like, as students, connect with other students by just responding or just sliding in someone's DMs to talk about like how you can connect offline. And I think that's a lot more normal than people may think it is. So.
Yeah, it is a lot more normal. I think that we've shifted much more from sending emails. I used to get a lot of emails. Now I get, like you're saying, DMs from people in academia that want to connect. And as somebody is posting in the side here in the chat, this was so important during COVID when we're all shut off from each other, when we had virtual conferences this year, we're not coming in contact with large numbers of people in our discipline. So reaching out in these more personal ways is really important. And I think, I speak for myself, maybe for you guys as well. It means a lot to get a message from somebody that's like, hey, I see what you're doing. I like what you're doing. Let's chat about it. Like sometimes you just need that. Okay, thanks everyone. Those are really good strategies and tactics. Now I'm going to get into some of the more challenging topics that people might encounter when they're trying to branch out in social media. So what are some challenges that you've experienced using social media to support your professional life? And we'll go broad and then we'll bring it down. So I will start with Carrie. Dr. Wu, what are some challenges that you've experienced?
Challenge probably like end up spending too much time on social media. So that's probably the challenge, that you become like you have to spend some time every single day on, like you have this, like especially early on for me, like okay, every day I will check my Twitter, ResearchGate, right? But not anymore, right? So that's something that we can control, right? So probably that's the only challenge I experienced.
Definitely have that challenge where I'm like, oh, I'm checking Twitter right now for professional reasons. And then you go down the rabbit hole. Thank you. Dr. Martino, what are some challenges that you experience using social media?
Yeah, the time, that's definitely one. I totally agree. I think the second one is picking the right battles. Sometimes in social media, there are some comments and questions or things that are not the most well-informed or just plain problematic, right? And it's really time consuming having those back and forths in those spaces, right? And then other people jump in, and and then you notice this huge thread going on, and your whole afternoon has passed by. So I think for me, it's also trying to be like more careful about picking up which battles I should engage in. You know, when do I step in? When do I need to disengage, right, from social media as well, and be like, you know, I did the best I can, or I'm just going to share this article and leave, you know. So just being like caring to myself and to others around.
Excellent. Yeah, that's a really good point. You can't fight all the battles, even though sometimes, man, you want to. And it takes some emotional energy to go on social media, put yourself out there, but also to read some of the pretty terrible content that's also circulating. So that's a good point. Kayan, what about you?
Yeah, very similar to what Carrie and Ellen had both mentioned. Sometimes you see some really problematic stuff online, and that downs your mood. And sometimes you just have to like figure out when you just need to get off and take a break. But I think one of like the biggest challenges is managing my time on social media, which is why I am an aspiring digital minimalist, because I get sucked down the rabbit hole very, very easily. So I think that's been one of the biggest challenges for me, trying to strike the right balance between when enough time is useful and when enough time is just being obsessing over social media.
So I actually want to circulate back on this point of, it seems like we all have two main challenges that we're experiencing. Is we want to fight a lot of battles, and that can be draining, and we spend a lot of time on social media. So what are some strategies you use to limit your time on social media? Do any of you have some strategies around that? Okay.
Yeah, I deleted the Twitter app off my phone. So like if I want to go on Twitter now, I have to like take the time to like go on the Twitter web, or like have to log on to my laptop to go on Twitter, which like disincentivizes me from like just mindlessly scrolling and picking up my phone. And I try to not, I put my phone on do not disturb, and I don't have notifications turned off, so like I don't see things come up. So I'm not tempted to use the apps. It's addictive, like it's really bad. So yeah, I just try to disincentivize my social media app use as much as I can. And then kind of just use it sparingly. I try my best not to use Twitter or go on Twitter first thing in the morning, but sometimes that's that's hard. But those small little things that kind of like make accessing it harder has helped me.
That's good. That sounds a lot like people who take their work email off their phone, that you're starting to sort of separate your work life a little bit. Dr. Martino, what about you? What are some strategies you use for not going down the rabbit hole?
Very similarly, I turn off notifications so I have a little bit more control when to engage, when to disengage. I do spend quite a bit of time sometimes. It's just this distraction, but also it's just fun to know what other people are up to, right? Like when you're having a difficult day and you can post something and people support you, or and vice versa, right? Or someone posts something, happy news, and you support them, it makes you feel nice and cozy, right? So it's just finding the right time to engage.
That's a good point. Also, maybe there are certain times in the day that you want to take some time and go on social media, or you've scheduled time for work time, and Twitter is going to take a bit of a backseat right now. Dr. Wu, what about you? How do you balance the pull of social media?
I like Alan's the way he put it. Like it's finding the right time to use. Like for me, it's like thinking about like when I'm on the subway, when I'm doing some other stuff. Like I need to look at the social media. Like during that time, right time that you can like, okay, I take a look at the news, what updates from Twitter, right? Maybe like, hey, on that, maybe not the first thing in the morning, right? So try to keep in mind that, okay, first thing in the morning, don't look at Twitter. And maybe at the end of the day, like when you're going to sleep, try to avoid, right? But you can, of course, a lot of times during the day, like you can like the right time that you can spend on Twitter, social media.
Yeah, this is a really good point. As an example, myself, I don't go on Twitter first thing in the morning because it tends to get me riled up, and that's my writing time. And I'd like to not get riled up before I need to start writing. But I do go on at lunchtime and then after work, usually around 4:35, my brain's shutting down, and that's maybe when I can take some time to go into social media. So I think it's really important that you set boundaries around social media use, because it will drag you in, and it maybe gives you a little bit of time to get other things done in your day. But I mean, we're not all perfect, and I know I get sucked in sometimes, and I'm sure you all do too. So that brings us to the other challenge that you mentioned, is how do you handle negative feedback or just problematic posts that are out there, either on your own Twitter feed that you get comments, or that you see circulating? How do you deal with that? I'm going to start with Kayon.
Yeah, I just turn off Twitter. I just try to log off and disengage. I'm not one to like, I'm not a Twitter fighter. Like I don't be going on threads and like arguing back and forth with people. I haven't been on like that on Facebook for a while, just because yeah, it's taken a lot of energy out of me. So now I'm just like, you know what, like I need to pick my battles, and I put that away. I haven't gotten a lot of like negative feedback on my own personal posts. I think the one time that happened is when my tweet went viral, and there were some people saying some weird stuff to me, but then some Black woman came for them, and I'm just like, all right, like yeah, I'll do your thing. Thank you so much. So I appreciate them doing that. But I haven't experienced much negative feedback from my personal social media posts. But when I do see a lot of like problematic stuff, or just things that like I feel like are not, yeah, I try to just disengage.
I think that's a good point, that there, like we were saying earlier, you got to pick your battles. And there's some battles that you should fight and can fight. And then there's others that you know that you need to take a step back from. And it's always nice when there are other people that are willing to step in and fight them too, for you, not for you, but with you, and are there. And that's really encouraging. Dr. Martino, how do you deal with challenging posts or negative posts?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've certainly faced is misunderstandings. Sometimes in our posts, right? Like we write something, just those few words, and people might not read it the same way that you would expect them to read. It's out of our control. So in instances like that, or misunderstandings, I would always take the time to explain, this is where I'm coming from, like this is what I mean, and I try to do that. Some battles are also not worth picking. So for example, I remember one piece I wrote, it was about the need for intersectionality. And then the very first comment was someone saying, as a white man, I need to say this. I mean, that already, like, as soon as I saw the beginning of the sentence, I was like, I'm not going to engage, right? So for me, it's like, again, being knowledgeable, being thoughtful about what battles you want to engage. And it's totally fine to disengage if that's what feels the right move. You can always mute, you can always block, and I'm not afraid of using those, sometimes it's needed, right? Like I think there are opportunities for dialogue and opportunities to share. Here's another article that speaks about this. This is where I'm coming from. But there are also moments that it's just not going to go very far, and I don't have the time to invest. So moving on. Yeah.
Those are really good points. Not being afraid to block someone who is posting problematic content, I think is absolutely fair. Thank you. Dr. Wu, what about you? How do you deal with challenging posts and content?
So for me, like just like understand that there's things out there that can be everything, right? So just understand that on Twitter or like all those things. So first, that understand that, and the second thing, like try not to engage. For me, I try not to engage. If you see don't like or like see, like I try to not engage. Or like if it's very personal, like some people like trying to like negative comments or even attack you. Like best way is like just say thanks. Right? Like I just say thanks, then you end up there. Like so for example, I think last year, then I think I shared something, and then people like didn't like, and then they comment on it, and then like in a negative way, and I would just say thanks, right? And then that's the best way to like tell them shut up, and I don't want to engage with you, and then right. So and then you feel okay that okay thanks, and then everything will end up there.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, there's not much you can do with a reply that's thanks.
Yeah.
And they can't escalate that in any way.
Yeah.
And I think that there's also the really good point is that Dr. Martino made, that using Twitter, we have such a limited amount of space to express yourself and deal with these challenging situations. And so that is part of the battle of picking which fight to fight. Is you express yourself, this person is also expressing themselves, and you know what, there's only so much space to do this in, so you gotta disengage sometimes. So thank you. So we've talked about some challenging situations, and I think that these are likely to come up for anybody who's in social sciences and sociology who's using Twitter, because a lot of our conversations focus on inequality. How do you think we, being the sociology community, both the professional groups that we are part of, thinking about the Canadian Sociological Association or the Student Concern Subcommittee, how do you think, and then also individuals, could better support scholars online? So how can we create communities, both thinking about the actually structured communities and ourselves, to support each other? Who will we start with? We'll start with Cam.
Yeah, so I have two things to say. The first is that I think that programs, departments, the discipline needs to take more seriously training in social media, because this is going to be a thing of the future. Like, this isn't going anywhere. And I think it's going to become even more important to our professional identity. So things like this, more formalized, institutionalized way of training students how to use social media, best ways of using social media, I think is going to be very important and like should be taken very seriously. And using like experts in the topic, right? Like people who are like, or who are doing it and like, and are well-versed on it, like not taking it very lightly. The second thing I'll say that is, although like my challenges on social media have been just like struggling with balancing and like wanting to not see problematic things, a lot of public facing scholars, a lot of women scholars, a lot of scholars of color who have like a large following experience a lot of harassment, experience doxing on social media. So that is like a real thing. And so there's this, on one hand, there's this push for like universities to want scholars to do more public facing work and like get their work into communities and stuff like that. But at the same time, they're not supporting people when they're doing that. Like, okay, if I'm doing that, I amass a large following on social media and people start harassing me, especially in sociology departments where we're doing more critical work sometimes, like that puts people at risk. One of my really close friends, she's not like super Twitter famous, but she has like a following of like 8,000 people. She posted something and people were like finding her job, finding that she like her personal information isn't on social media, but they found a lot of information about her and posted it on social media. So like, how are you going to support and protect scholars when that happens to them? And I don't think that there are institutionalized mechanisms of supporting people and scholars when they encounter things like that. And that's like a very real and scary thing when it's happening. So I think that in light of people using social media more, using Twitter more, institutions, professional programs also need to take more seriously institutional mechanisms we can put in place to support and protect scholars who are at risk of that type of harassment and doxing.
I think that that's a fantastic point on two levels. The first, that universities have started to put in place organizations that help us with media literacy in terms of being interviewed for television or radio, but I don't know that we have ventured as solidly into training faculty and students into how we could deal with social media platforms most effectively. And I think that you talk about a really critical point, is that our safety sometimes is at jeopardy if we are going to publicly discuss our research that sometimes people find challenging. And I think that you're right, that institutions, the ones that we work for and our scholarly communities could step up in terms of the training that we provide and the support that we provide individuals. Dr. Martino, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I think some of the things that come to mind is creating more opportunities for meeting in real life. Like I remember going to the ASA, we had a meeting of Twitters, like that was organized. Like how amazing is that, right? Like for us all awkward people to meet finally in person. Having more panels like this that support people, right? In terms of how to participate in the spaces, how to make the most out of it, how to construct your persona online. It's an opportunity for mentorship, I think, too, like especially like I think for faculty members to support students in developing those that persona, but also protecting. I think that piece around safety and protection is so important. I can share briefly a story. So when I was a graduate student, I had a senior faculty member that reached out to me on Twitter, seemed to be extremely interested in my research until they asked me to come to their hotel room, right? I mean, so there is also those awful, right? Like, so I always like to encourage students to approach faculty members and not be afraid, but I definitely want to really be very careful too. And I think that's one of the things that we need to protect our students, especially because students are in the most marginalized kind of position. Students are hoping to get postdocs. Students are hoping to get positions, and they might be in a position where they might feel constrained in terms of approaching those moments. So I think that even, it's definitely important to acknowledge how social media, unfortunately, also opens up opportunities for predatory, awful negativity as well, right? And protecting each other is extremely important.
Thank you for sharing that story. I think that you've highlighted a really important point as well, the predatory aspect of social media, and that in the mobilization of knowledge of how to use social media, we also need to have more conversations about how to safely use social media and what is okay and what is not okay in academia. Sometimes we run into these really dangerous and harmful experiences, and it can feel isolating. I know myself in grad school had some challenging situations, and I didn't know who I had to talk to. So if we have institutions that are set up to discuss how we can safely interact with each other and what's okay and what's not, maybe this is the optimist in me, that we can maybe eliminate or dismantle some of these problems that we're having. Dr. Wu, what do you think?
One thing I will add is like use social media to promote sense of belonging, right? So individually, for example, within Canadian sociology, CSA, like for example, we can follow each other, and then in terms of institutions, organizations, right? So for department have Twitter account, then it's better for the department to follow their own students, own researcher, faculty members, like, so use the media platform to promote a sense of belonging, right, within the community. It's very, very important, right? I see many, like you see the people who have more following more people than the followers. Like you can tell the differences, right? So for me, I like if you look at my Twitter account, like probably the number is like double in size. Those are follow and then those followers. Like so for me, I always follow people who follow me, like students, whatever, like background. So like I think it's personally, I feel like it's important, right? ASA following me following ASA, or like York sociology following me. Like it's part of the sociology and part of the community, and this create a sense of belonging, right? So not just like you, and like, it's just a community. Very, especially we spend so much time on social media, and in that connection and sense of belonging, even you don't need to know each other, right? So it's just like, okay, we connected in a way that is online, and that give you a like.
I think that's an important point, that you can use Twitter. Twitter should be used to build this community, and hopefully, I think that we are making strides to make this more supportive spaces for users. But you kind of touch on a really important point. A lot of people think that Twitter use is face value, but speaking, I think, for some of the Canadian Sociological Association people that are here, we take it really personally, and we appreciate who is following our page and who is not. It's not just this blind like or dislike. I know who's following my page, and if I see you at a CSA, I'll talk to you. So like it is a way of building community. We are actually making connections. Canadian Sociology Association is small. Like we see you. So if you're trying to reach out, you're trying to make connections, it makes a difference. And hopefully, I mean, I'm kind of low in the career, but like, hopefully this is the same feeling that some profs have as well, that they notice who is taking part and they notice who is reaching out. So that's a really good point. Even though we don't think that it's building community, it really is. So next, in terms of some of the challenges, and I want to come back to Kaon's post that she shared, how do we deal with imposter syndrome or the humble brag? So I'll delve into these a little bit more. So the imposter syndrome conversation is something that comes up a lot with the student concern subcommittee of challenges that our young scholars face, is that they don't feel comfortable putting themselves out there in terms of the types of research that they're doing, anything that they have published or that they're promoting, because they don't really feel like they belong to that work or that they have the right to post it. And then this also goes along with something that I've heard a lot as well, is this humble brag that, oh, this person is putting themselves out there. This is just a humble brag, but like really, that's a little too far. So how do we strike this balance in the humble brag and imposter syndrome? And should humble brag just go? So Kayan, let's start with you.
Yeah, humble brag is interesting. I don't know how I feel about that, but I understand it. And the imposter syndrome, yeah, as my tweet said, I've started to think about imposter syndrome much differently now. And since that framing, like I don't feel like I don't belong in the academy. I don't feel like I'm gonna get caught or I'm gonna get found out. I think it's like, when I think about what is my environment telling me, like when I go into a department that's like predominantly white, like of course I'm gonna feel like I'm not supposed to be here. When I go to a meeting and I'm the only Black person, I'm the only Black woman in there, like of course I'm gonna feel like I don't belong here. But that has nothing to do with me and my ability. That's just the environment. Like that is a product of like structural inequality. So I think that framing has been helpful for me. In terms of like humble brag or bragging, like that's how people get to, like, not bragging, but like telling people about your accomplishments, like that's how people get to know what you're doing and who you are. And also that's evidence that you're doing well. So like, and you work hard for yourself. Like I put in a lot of work. All us academics put in a lot of work to like produce good things, right? You should celebrate that. Like you should celebrate that. So when I see people celebrating or putting their accomplishments on Twitter, I'm like so happy. I don't perceive it as a humble brag. I'm like, good for you, because I know how much work that must have taken on your part to do that, and that you've accomplished that you've gotten this recognition. Like good on you. So I don't know. I think that like posting your accomplishments, posting the things that you're doing, I think that that might be a way of like helping in a way about with imposter syndrome by like proving, like providing evidence for yourself that like, yeah, like I am good enough, like I am supposed to be here. And when you post it on Twitter and everyone's like, yeah, good for you, like this is great, and you have a community of people who are like, oh my gosh, that's amazing, like you're brilliant, it makes you feel good. So post your shit, like talk your shit. Like I don't know, I do it because, and I love when I see people do it, because I think that that is great and you belong. If you've gotten this far, like you're supposed to be here. So yeah, that's what I'll say about that.
Two things. I appreciate so much your post about imposter syndrome being, is it imposter syndrome or systemic racism? Is it imposter syndrome, or are we dealing with some structural gender inequalities that are inherent in our institutions? Let's break it down and call it what it is. And I think that that conversation is really important because it doesn't put the onus back on us, our individual feelings. It's reflecting back out on this system that is causing people to feel this way. And that's really important. And also your feelings about humble brag, I exactly mirror them. And it's something as a student that you have a hard time with because you spend all this time alone and you do all this work alone. And it can be hard to put yourself out there. And I mirror Kaon's opinion that when I see somebody that's posting up an article or an award, I am so dang proud of you and I am so happy for you that yeah, celebrate it. We don't get a lot of opportunities in life to celebrate things. Put it out there. We all are really happy to see what you've done. Dr. Martina, what do you think?
For me, it's about creating a space for mutual appreciation and just plain genuine happiness for each other's success. You know, like, can we nurture some of that feeling of like, I'm genuinely happy for people. Like I have colleagues that every time I post a new publication, I know they will post congratulations. And one of my colleagues, Alicia Walker, she will always post like a GIF, you know, celebrating and jumping. And I do the same for her every time she posts good news. Like this is a kind of space that I think is the best. It's like supporting, celebrating each other. And for me, it's about finding a balance of like celebrating my achievements and things that I'm proud of, but at the same time, allowing myself to be a little vulnerable, and also sharing stories of like, oh, I didn't get that grant. Oh, I got a rejection today. You know, that kind of shows the ups and downs are both, you know, that is not always good or news. It's not always success, right? Sometimes there are weeks that I don't feel very good. And sometimes sharing that, I think people appreciate. So it's like creating a balanced picture of what my life and work is like, right? And finally, I think that by sharing those aspects of your life, it's an opportunity for people to get to know you, your interests, your passion. Like when people know me, like in my Twitter, for example, they know I'm the disability and sexualities person. Like they know it's my passion. I'm always posting stuff about that. I'm always up to date, you know, like, so people start identifying you with that interest and that passion. And when something comes up, for example, and that's my a tip too, when, for example, I had colleagues who were like, oh my God, we need a book chapter on this. Alan, can you do this for us? Mm-hmm. Like you become identified to that passion, right? And people come to you and they start recognizing you, which is really fun.
Yeah, that's a really important point. We were just talking about all of the challenges and sort of the negative space in social media, but by promoting the work that we do and the work that others do, we're creating a safer and more supportive space, the kind of community that we want to see. And I think that that's really important. And it's a community that keeps on giving and thinking about people reaching out and giving you opportunities from it too. So an encouragement to students, don't feel afraid of posting your accomplishments, but even like Dr. Martino said, if you're frustrated and things aren't going great, you can post that too, because it doesn't go great for all of us a lot of the time. And that's part of being a scholar, and that needs to be normalized as well. Dr. Wu, what do you think?
Kayan, did you raise your hand? You want
Yeah, but
being
please
first?
you speak first and then I'll comment after.
Okay.
Thanks, Carrie.
Just like for me, it's like just focus on myself, like because it's my Twitter, so I don't care much about. Like I understand that whatever you say, the half people will like it, another half maybe not gonna like it. So for me, is that I'm like trying to be confident. Like if I want to say something, of course you can't be asshole, like because it's a public space, like place, you can't be in a way that is so think. But then if you want to share something, then you go ahead, right? Share something, but you can also just not using it, right? You have a Twitter account, you have a something that you don't need to use it, right? You can just use it as a way. Okay, you watch news, you follow things, right? You don't have to use it. But when, for example, you want to share your research, then just be confident, right? So this is my research idea, what I have done, like be confident and go ahead, right? But just try to understand that whatever you do, some people may like it, others may not, but that's okay, right? It's fine, right? So just be confident. So that's the way I deal with it.
And I have to say, Carrie and I went through the program together, and Carrie is one of the greatest people for sharing confidence in things. And I've come to Carrie Wu before saying, oh, and whinging and being like, oh, this is hard. And I don't know if I should post this. And he's like, just post it. Just post it. It doesn't matter. People are going to like it or they're not going to like it, but most people are going to like it. Just do it. And like, it's a great attitude to have. So Carrie, thank you so much for sharing that. Kayan, you had your hand up.
Yeah. I have two things to say. The first is that, like, I think it's totally normal. I think as students, as graduate students, we feel like we have to be experts in things the first time that we do it, but like it's very normal for things to be hard and like for you to not get things the first time you do it. And I think that might be what's contributing to like imposter syndrome in some ways, that like things feel hard. You feel like you're supposed to be getting it, but you're not getting it. But it's like, in any other context, like the first time you learn something, of course you're not going to get, like it's normal to not be good at it the first time you do it. But as graduate students, like we feel like we have to have mastery of it. So like it's supposed to be hard. And if it's hard, that's okay. You're smart, you'll get through it. That's the first thing. The second thing is in terms of like talking about our accomplishments. So there's this hashtag on Twitter called SOSAF, and it's like a double entendre, right? So it's like sociological affirmations, but also like sociology as fuck. And so people talk about celebrate different wins that they've had throughout the week. So people talk about like getting a journal acceptance, but people also talk about things like, I don't know, making breakfast or like going on a good run. Like one of my SOSAFs was like advancing to intermediate bachata and salsa. So like that's like a win and a celebration for myself. That isn't like a traditional, like, oh, I got a journal acceptance or whatever, but I think it's still something to celebrate. So celebrating all the wins in your life, like not just like these traditional professional ones, I think is also like a healthy way of cultivating that confidence in yourself.
That's a really good point. And I really appreciate you sharing that hashtag. I'm going to use it. But also basing off what I said about Carrie and then what you were saying too, we're all going to feel like we're not doing things right all the time. But if you need to feel like you have somebody in your corner, I can speak for myself. I am in your corner if you're posting something that is a win. So you know what, there are people out there, we all care. We all want you to be posting things and showing your achievements and maybe even like non-academic achievements. We think that they're great. So do it. This is how we build the community. So we're just going to wrap up some of our questions here. So we've talked a lot, started getting into the idea of what sociology grad students should be thinking about when they're posting. So what advice would you give to a sociology grad student who's looking to further their professional development through social media use? So what should or shouldn't they be posting, or what should they really focus on right now? Oh, sorry, Cam.
Yeah, I think as graduate students, as a graduate student, what I'm focusing on is like building my reputation, or like making people know who I am, getting my name out there, connecting with other people. And like a good way to do that is by, well, SociAF is an excellent hashtag to be connected to a lot of sociologists globally. When I'm online and I see people tweeting things that I'm interested in, I follow them. Scholars that I admire, scholars that I follow, that I really look up to, I follow them as well. I think that those are some good way, like I think pretty like low stakes ways as well of like getting into social media. And then when you build up the confidence, like I'm still struggling with building up the confidence to keep on tweeting, but when you build up the confidence to tweet things that you think you want people to know you for. And as Alan was saying, like you also be very careful in what you're tweeting, because once you put it out there, it's out there. So yeah.
It's really important. Be careful what you're tweeting, but have, you know what, share what you want to share and don't feel like you're held back on it. Dr. Martino, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree with that too. I think definitely post about opportunities, publications, funding success, allows us to celebrate with you, right? There's an amazing team here that will be happy to share and send you GIFs and everything to celebrate.
Yeah.
If you're looking for opportunities, right? Like it's a community, it's a, the rest of us is a resource, right? So if you're looking for jobs, if you're in the job market, I would definitely keep an eye out, right? Is there something that comes out that is in their research interest? So definitely helps to keep, you know, that call, engage, right? If you have questions, and I've seen that used a lot by graduate students, where we're like, how do I write a diversity statement? Any tips? And then suddenly it's like this growing thread. And I think the CSA has been really great. And same with the student subcommittee in terms of retweeting those and being like, hey, folks, can you please jump in and provide more insights here? So I think that's a great way the organization is supporting those moments of asking for tips. So definitely use this as a opportunity to engage and learn from others, but also share your own knowledge.
This is a really good point. If you're afraid of posting your own comments, post a question. That's how we also build build community, is everybody giving you feedback on something that you're maybe stuck on. So don't feel afraid to use social media to sort of solve some of the problems that you're encountering. Dr. Hu, what do you think? How can grad students use social media?
Yeah, so talk about like be yourself, right? So use it on your then. But one thing I want to add is like be a citizen, right? Be a citizen in society, but also online. Now, like increasingly, it's like online society. Be a citizen, like in a way that, for example, Alan mentioned about retweeting some like opportunities you see, or like you see some ad job opportunities or award, like you can like very quickly create a short post, like in case if that it can benefit others, or like people need to know like there's opportunities, or the way like you can like create those kind of quick post and then share with others, like sharing, right? Sharing is like caring, right? So like be a citizen, be a citizen. I think it's very important to be online. Like you want to be seen in a way that you contribute.
That's a really good point, that when you're sharing, you're actually contributing to the community. And also it's not just sharing on your wall. You might DM someone some content that you think would be particularly helpful to them, like a job posting or something like that. And that's how you build this citizenship. And I think that's a really important point. So now that we've gone a little bit over the formal question and answer period, I'm actually going to turn to the group or the participant question and answer period, because you've probably all heard me talk enough. So what I'm going to get you all to do is, as I'm going through some of the questions, I'd actually like my panelists, if there was any accounts or people that you think people should follow, if you can post them in the chat bar at the side, that would be really helpful for some of our participants. And as you're doing that, I'm going to go through the questions that some of our participants maybe have posted along. So if you're a participant in this panel today, or in this webinar, if you have any questions that you want to ask the panelists, please post them below in the question and answers thing, and I will go through them and I will pose them to the panelists. You can also upvote any of the questions that your peers might have posted, and so that might be really helpful for getting your voices across. So I'll just open up the question Q&A section now. And as I'm doing this, people, I can see Kayan is starting to post some of the people that might be interesting, or accounts that might be interesting for you to follow, might be useful as a grad student. So any participants, if you have any questions, please throw them up in the question and answer tool. Just wait. Sorry for the leaf blower. So if participants have any questions, you can put them in the question and answer function for the same window. So we have one question. Emma, you've just put your question into the chat. I'm just going to ask you to throw it over to the Q&A so that people can upvote it if they want to, but I'll get to it. So we have one attendee who is asking, how do you differentiate between what is too personal for social media? Have you ever regretted posting something about your life on social media? Thank you. So who would like to field this one? So have any of you posted things that was maybe too personal, or have you regretted what you've posted?
At least personally, I don't think I have ever regretted anything, just because, especially when it's something a little bit more personal. And if I'm posting on Twitter, which I have a lot more open access there, I think I tend to think twice before posting. Right? If it's on Facebook, where it's much more close group, more close connections where they get me, I have less chances of misunderstandings. I think I'm much more braver to post things there without thinking as much. But in platforms like Twitter, I would definitely ask myself twice, is this something I'm comfortable with? Especially because once you post it out there, it's out there, right? Like people can do screenshots, that's it. Right. So definitely I would encourage people, just think twice. Like, am I going to feel comfortable if I come back next week and this is out there?
Great. Dr. Wu or Kayan, have you ever posted something that you regretted? Go ahead, Kayan.
Yeah, not in recent years. Certainly when I was on Twitter in high school, I posted a lot of stuff that I regret, and then I deleted that Twitter account. But not in recent years, because I do think carefully about what I post. And even when I do post personal things, like sometimes I post like dance videos of myself doing like salsa on Twitter, and I don't mind those, because I think that they are that is what I want the world to see about me. So I think it's very content, like person dependent. Like, I think that's a question that you have to reflect on yourself. Like, what do you feel comfortable sharing with Twitter? Like Jessica Calarco, who I posted in the chat, she's definitely someone you should follow on Twitter. She wrote a book, The Field Guide to Grad School, Uncovering the Hidden Curriculum. She posts a lot of great stuff on Twitter, but she also posts stuff about her children. Like she posts pictures of her children and like things that her children say. So one of my other advisors, like, I would never post that on my Twitter, but like, so it's very person dependent to what you feel comfortable sharing and what you don't.
Great. Carrie, what do you think?
Yeah, it's personal. It's more personal, right? So you can decide whether what to share. Like for me, like more personal stuff, I share like just pictures. Like sometimes go to a park, visit some places. I like this a nice picture. Sometimes I will post it up. And the other thing is like NBA. I watch a lot of basketball. Sometimes I post like, so the only two things like more personal. Other than that, I rarely share like the personal stuff. Yeah, but like it's your account, right? This is just think like Alan mentioned, that it's very important that something out there than out there. You need to really think about like in a week or 2 weeks, is this thing still out there? Do you regret? And maybe think twice before posting.
Those are really good points, that your account is personal and the content that you put on it should reflect you. But also maybe think really critically before you put content on, how it's going to be taken and how it's going to go over time, because as we know, things do last on the internet. Go ahead, Dr. Martino.
And just be thoughtful about what you're putting out there, right? So for example, sometimes I've seen faculty members complaining about students and the way they write about it, it's very detailed. And like, if I were a student, and I saw that my professor posting that, like that would hurt my feelings, like,
Yeah.
So I think being very thoughtful about like, we get it that we all want to vent, but I think there are also things that should stay off, social media, perhaps a text message, that's enough, so just being thoughtful in that way too.
That's a really good point, Kayon.
And some people create burner accounts, like things like separate accounts that aren't their professional Twitter, but like things that they want to post or like retweet or share that they wouldn't want like their colleagues to see. So, I mean, if you really want to get some stuff out there, but don't want to put it on like your personal Twitter, like burner accounts I have a lot of colleagues who have like separate accounts that they just, not they're tweeting any like wild stuff, but just stuff that they don't want, like personal stuff that they wouldn't want a colleague to see.
Yeah, it's always creating a fine line, especially if you're teaching, about the content that you want your peers to see, but maybe also your students to see. And I completely agree, Dr. Martino, that if you're teaching, you don't want to be talking smack about your students. It's not going to go over well, and it's just not very nice. So it's something to maybe keep to yourself or share with your friends when you're having dinner or something like that instead. We have a question from Emma Martin, who says, have you ever used social media in your research? So have any of you used social media in your research, and how did you do that? I see some nodding heads. Kayan, go ahead.
Yeah, so for my master's thesis, I used social media, and that was really helpful. I recruited people on social media because it was during the pandemic. So I had initially planned to go to like healthcare clinics and post out flyers, but I ended up just circulating virtual flyers on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp. And I actually got all my participants in Canada in like one day. It was only like 10 people, but like it was still like I was able to recruit so fast because of the way that the recruitment flyers spread. So certainly I think that virtual recruitment on social media is like really great and is a great benefit of social media as well.
Awesome. Dr. Martina, you were nodding your head. Have you used social media for your research?
Yeah, I would say certainly for recruitment. That's a nice way to put your word out there, ask people to share, but also in terms of, again, identifying potential community partners and who to talk to and what kinds of projects they're doing. Sometimes, the project ideas might come from me as research projects, but also from the community. Like I've seen people doing interesting community work and I'm like, oh my God, I need to touch base with this organization. And I would just DM them and say, hey, this is who I am. I would love to collaborate. And most of the time, again, I think our community organizations are really interested in collaborating with academics. It's just a matter of bridging, right?
Dr. Wu, what about you? Have you used social media in your research?
In my research, I use it as a tool, right? Sometimes you see some data like people share, right? For example, during the pandemic, the case of anti-Asian racism, all those like there's a lot of people collecting data and then they share on Twitter, and then like sometimes I save some data from Twitter data, and then like in a way that if when I write articles, I will talk about those Twitter data, right? So it's just a way of collecting information. Yeah.
Great. So a lot of different ways to use Twitter for your research directly to recruit, but also to sort of store data and maybe pick things that might be relevant later. We have another question. Can you speak to personal websites? So are there any tips you have in designing these to effectively lead for your academic career? So do any of you have personal websites? And if you do, how have you used those? So Dr. Martino, it sounds like you do, or it looks like you do. So what do you think?
Yes, I do. I think it's a lot of work to keep those up to date. I think that's the challenge. And as Dr. Wu was talking about ResearchGate, now we have so many websites that we have to take care of. We have ResearchGate, academia.edu, and so on, right? So it becomes a lot of work to keep all those different profiles up to date. And I think that's the challenge. So usually I try to at least the website and like academia, like to keep those two up to date. And try to bring people to the website, right? By making it simple to navigate. I think simplicity is the best approach, right? Most of the time, what do people care about? They want to know what you publish, what kinds of courses you're teaching, if you're open to supervising, like just keep it as clean and as possible.
Okay. Anybody else have a personal website that they have created?
Yeah, I also have a personal website. I developed it when I was a master's student. And I agree with Alan that you want to keep it as simple as you can because updating it can be a real pain. When I first created it, I had all of these tabs, like separating each thing in my CV, like teaching, research, the public, like all of these things. And then now I have 3 tabs, like about me, CV, and my blog, because it was just too much to update. But I think it's a great thing to have. Having that there is great. It like really, I think, improves like your online presence. When someone Googles you, it comes up. I try to get people there through my online, like my departmental website. So like I'm like, oh, if you want to learn more about me, check me out on my website here. So you can link to my website. And I think it's just like a nice online presence to have to supplement like your departmental website, to supplement your Twitter and things like that.
That's a really good point, that it can supplement some of the content that's already online, and maybe you want to control that content a little bit, but also keep in mind that it's a lot of work. So I'm going to cram the last 2 questions into one question. So how do you get started on Twitter? Starting from 0 can be really challenging. And then you mentioned before, some of you, that sometimes if you've had these accounts for a really long time, you have things maybe previously that you don't necessarily reflect you as an academic. So how do you start from scratch, and what do you do with old lingering content?
If it's okay, I'll just comment quickly because I have to go right now, unfortunately. But follow back, like I think a lot of people, academics, are like happy to follow back. So if you want to go from 0 to increasing your follower count, so follow people will tend to follow you back. When you start tweeting things and joining conversations, people kind of like see what you're about. When you start retweeting things, people kind of get a gist of like the type of person that you are, whether or not they want you on their feed, and then they'll follow as well. And then in terms of like purging, I had to delete my high school Twitter because it was just too bad. So I just deactivated that account and started a brand new. So if you have lingering things in the past, like people can advanced search your stuff. Tweets from like years back can come back up. So if you have things that you probably don't want in your current moment that don't represent you right now, I would say just delete, deactivate, and then start fresh again. But it was a pleasure being on the panel. Nice being in conversation with you all. And if anyone wants to talk offline, feel free to DM me. Take care.
Thank you so much. Bye, Kayon.
Bye.
So Dr. Martino and Dr. Wu are going to stick around just to finish up this last question, and then we're going to wrap up the panel as well. So how do you start from scratch, and what did you do with lingering content? Dr. Martino or Carrie, which one would you like to go? Go ahead for it.
In terms of starting from 0, what I like to do again is usually supporting students with drawing a map, like mapping out, like let's think about the main scholars in your field, like sociology of family. Who are the key people you're reading? Who you really want to stay up to date with? And start with those, right? Start with people around you, other graduate students you know, other faculty members in your program. And it very quickly, you start seeing who people follow and share, and you start following those too. Most of the time, I do find that a lot of people follow you back. A lot of sociologists will follow you and be happy to see where you are. In terms of those lingering, so far, at least, I don't think I've ever come across any posts that bother me. It's more about like, wow, I was a different person back then. Like I hadn't even come out that year. So for me, I see these memories as like it's a snapshot in time, right? So at that time, this is where I was. And now I'm here. So for me, that's how I prefer to look at it. But of course, if someone really has something in the past that just doesn't feel like it really speaks to them anymore, that's totally fine to delete or, make it invisible. But that would be my way of going about it.
That's a really good point. Sometimes those older posts are snapshots of who we were, and who we are is an evolution over time. So if it's not too problematic, there's no point in deleting it if you want to keep that and reflect on it. Dr. Wu, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Alan. The start with like the people you know, and then like the field, the specific subfield you are in, right? So like the journals account, or like scholars who are like more like senior scholars in that field, and then you just follow. And then don't take it personal. If you follow them, they're not following back. It's okay, right? Don't take it personal, and don't think about it. It's just okay. It's fine. There's nothing like yeah, it's just I'm not sure how. Like I never like think things about like people not following you back. It's fine. Like you can decide whether you want to follow those people or not, and then you decided that you follow them, and if they don't follow, but that's fine. Yeah.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Dr. Martino, you have your hand up?
Just one final thought. Like, I think you need to be true to yourself, even in these online spaces. Like, and it's not for everyone. Like I think I would only recommend doing this work, like if you're really into it. Like you need to enjoy, like I actually enjoy creating this post. I actually enjoy engaging this way, but it's not for everyone. And if you really don't enjoy it, don't force yourself to do it just because you think it's cool or it's what people are doing. Then it comes out not genuine.
Yeah.
And it's just not the same. So be genuine and do it only if you actually enjoy it.
This is a really important point, and almost one that I wish we had brought up at the beginning, that social media isn't for everyone. And if you are someone who feels deeply uncomfortable using it and it's not the space for you, you don't have to use it. You can advance your career in other ways. But if we are going to use social media, let's use it in a respectful way, and let's build community and build each other up. And if somebody doesn't like what you're posting, not the end of the world. Like Carrie Wu says, some people don't like you, and that's okay. Just keep on trucking, and let's make it a community where we can support each other and make it a safer space for everyone. So thank you so much, Dr. Martino and Dr. Wu, for joining us today. And thank you so much to all of the people who signed up and joined us and posed questions. This was a really great discussion, and a lot of insightful comments and suggestions were made. I also want to thank the CSA for helping host this, and for the Students Concerned Subcommittee. We'll be sending out a feedback survey to all the audience members, and we'd really appreciate it if you could fill it out. So thank you again for joining, and we hope that you found this session helpful, and we hope that you join some of our other webinars later on this year and next year. So thank you all so much. Bye now.